If we want to dive into the topic of drift racing games for the PS1, we have to go back to where it all started, and that is with the very first Ridge Racer game. This iconic arcade racer was released for the PlayStation back in 1995, and originally was an arcade release that eventually became a launch title for the PS1 in Japan, North America and in Europe. And this game helped to solidify the PlayStation as the groundbreaking console of its time during the 90s. But not only that, this game also helped to change the whole face of racing games in general, as it was one of the very first 3D style racers. But not only that, where this game really shines, aside from its visual quality for its time, which the graphics were really good, the gameplay was excellent, but it was the drift mechanics where this game really started to shine. As even to this day, when you look at even modern games, very few racers have ever been able to manage or even replicate the drift mechanics that is offered in the very first Ridge Racer game. The only games that have managed to keep up with that is its sequels, both Ridge Racer Revolution, Ridge Racer Type 4, and even other sequels on later and more modern consoles. And a lot of other franchises have tried to replicate that formula, and they do a good job, but very few, if any, have ever managed to come close to those elements that is offered in the very first game in the series. And that's what makes Ridge Racer so unique, as not only was it a PlayStation 1 launch title, like this was one of the earliest games that was pretty much released within the first week of the PlayStation's launch period, and the fact is that it had so many elements on offer was quite incredible. Even though in terms of arcade racers for its time it offered a unique aesthetic, but also the gameplay was quite short in what it was offering, but it had so much adrenaline fueled mayhem that it just kept you coming back for more, because even when you did manage to master all of the tracks and the gameplay modes and time trial modes that was offered up to you in the game, what players really wanted to master was the drift mechanics. I know myself personally, that was one of the elements that I struggled with in the game for a long time, even up until the later sequels. It took years for me to perfect it, but once I did, and I'm sure you can all agree that it is one of the best moments that you will have in any type of game. The sense of achievement and reward that it gives you for mastering the perfect drift is just quite incredible, and it's amazing to see that such an early game on the PlayStation, but even just in games or an early 3D game in general, had such a unique feature, but it just added to the whole dynamic of the game that is not often replicated. So if we really want to look and dive into the whole dynamic of drift racing games, especially on the PlayStation, you have to look at the first game to experience that and to see what it's all about. And the thing is, Ridge Racer 1 is just as playable today as it's ever been. I still go back to play it all the time, as I just love the game so much. I just am a big fan of the series. But for me, it's the first game is where it really all started, and it's still the one I go back to play probably the most out of any of the Ridge Racer games, and for those reasons alone, as the drift mechanics are just so cool to use. And you will see with the rest of the games being mentioned in this series of where they got their inspiration from, and it all comes from the original Ridge Racer game. So if you haven't experienced it, or if you haven't played it in a long time, you really do need to go back and play one of the most iconic games that's ever graced the games industry, hands down. Burning Road was released for the PlayStation in 1996, and this is a very unique arcade style game that was exclusive to the PlayStation at that time. It tried to capitalise on the popularity of the likes of the Ridge Racer series and other well-known arcade racers on the system, but primarily wanted to have it focused on the console. So what is it like to play overall? The gameplay and the aesthetic is definitely very reminiscent of an arcade game. That's the one thing that this game really does do well, is the fact is that it looks and feels like an arcade game. Although visually it may not be as well polished compared to other racers in the system, but that doesn't even come into the equation, as a lot of these arcade racers, if you're very familiar with Ridge Racer, or more even to the point Daytona USA, you will get a very familiar vibe with Burning Road, as it does capture a lot of those ideals of what make arcade games so iconic and so popular. But where this game really shines is in its gameplay and its drift mechanics. Although the gameplay is very fast paced, it is also extremely challenging challenging, as this game is not an easy game to pick up and play, as it will require a lot of patience and determination to get a feel for the gameplay mechanics. But the overall gameplay does require mainly the use of drifting throughout the races, as you need to time your drifts going into corners to be able to maintain your speed so that you can still stay ahead of the pack when you're trying to win races, because the gameplay doesn't hold your hand in terms of making mistakes. If you do make a mistake, which you will in this game, you will be crucified, as the computer AI is relentless, and even when you are ahead in races, more often than not you never win a race by much. You might only win a race by maybe about a second if you're lucky, as they're always on top of you no matter where you are in the race at any given time, and any little mistake or slow down, or if you miss time, a drifter in the corner or hit something, they're on top of you straight away. So in order to win races, you have to primarily have an almost perfect or flawless run throughout the races in order to be able to win. Now, it is doable once you get familiar with the game and the gameplay style and the mechanics, but once you do that, you will have an epic experience, as you will have pretty much one of the best arcade experiences on the PlayStation in terms of the gameplay visuals, the gameplay style and the mechanics. If you can master all of those elements, it's definitely one of the best authentic arcade experiences that you can have on the PlayStation. So that in itself is worthwhile having a look, and for the most part the game is quite underrated and it definitely deserves a lot more love. So if you do want to play a very unique but challenging arcade style of games, Burning Road is definitely one to pick up and play for sure. Super Technic Challange was released back in 1996, and like many of the other games on this list, it also focuses on drift style elements, where you're tasked with competing in highly competitive races with the intention of earning points throughout each race to progress to the top of the leaderboards, where you can also unlock various other style JDM classic cars, extra parts and upgrade features for each vehicle so that you can continue to progress your overall continuation through the campaign. But unlike a lot of the other games in this list, Super Technic Challenge does offer a more substantial challenge in terms of its gameplay, physics and handling capabilities, as it's definitely not as easy to pick up and play compared to some of the other games mentioned here, as it does require a lot more skill and patience involved to really be able to master the control setup of each of the cars in the game. But if you're looking for something that is a bit more challenging and that you can really get your teeth into, then this may be a good option for you. Released only a few months after the iconic arcade game Ridge Racer, Ridge Racer Revolution continues on with the franchise's popular gameplay aesthetics and features. It took everything that was brilliant about the first game and added a few extra features and hidden items, but it also improved the gameplay mechanics, the visual style, with tweaked graphics, smoother gameplay and an overall faster sense of speed. It took everything that was good about the first game essentially and just scaled it up a notch. Now, this game never got a release in the arcade, as it was primarily a PlayStation exclusive, but it was also one of the first games like the original Ridge Racer to implement drift style elements into the gameplay. So as you're racing around the tracks, you could master the drift style mechanics, where you could go into lengthy drifts to get around corners, and using the drifts at the right time could help to benefit your process as you're racing, so that you can overtake racers on the corners and to maintain your speed overall throughout the race. But if you implement it wrong, it can hamper your progress, as you will crash straight into a wall like we could with the original game. But as with all of the Ridge Racer games in the series, with all of the drift style racers that are on the system, these original games, both Ridge Racer 1 and Ridge Racer Revolution, are still hands down probably two of the best games in my opinion to utilise the drift style elements, although they're a lot more easier to engage with. But they're the most easiest to use, but they've also perfected the system, which is quite incredible for very early versions of games, as they had really perfected the drift elements within racing games that you don't often see, and quite honestly a lot of games that came after it struggled to really implement those tactics. So this is still up there amongst the best games on the series and amongst some of the best arcade racers ever made. So Ridge Racer Revolution, like the first game in the series, is one of those games you really should check out just for that gameplay feel alone, as it is one of the best out there to implement those style of mechanics in any game, even to this day. Heavily inspired by the Ridge Racer series, Racingroovy Versus was released in 1997 as a direct comparison to those games that focuses on arcade style elements, but also utilises very similar drift mechanics as you've seen in other style of games released on the PlayStation. Although the gameplay is very fluid and vibrant, very colourful, the drift mechanics on the game wouldn't be as responsive as the Ridge Racer series in question and some of the other games on the system. But with a bit of finesse, patience and dedication, you can definitely get to grips with the control system and be able to master the physics so that you can really get a worthwhile experience. And if you manage to do that, you will actually have a very enjoyable game on your hands. So if you're looking for a unique arcade style racer that does actually have all those elements combined, Racingroovy Versus will definitely be one to look out for, as it is an old school type of classic and it was only released in Japan. So to experience something that is quite unique, now's the time to go and check it out. Explosive Racing is a sequel to Burning Road that was released for the PlayStation back in 1997, and like its predecessor, this is also a very unique arcade racer where it greatly enhances the gameplay elements from that of the first game. It keeps the same aesthetic in terms of the control system and the graphics, but it enhances the overall length of the game due to the amount of tracks and modes that are available. With this game, you have access to more cars, and this time around you also have the ability to race as motorcycles. But where the gameplay really stands out is due to its handling and control style. Now, although it takes a bit of getting used to, but primarily the focus is on not just arcade racing but drift style racing, as a lot of the tracks are set up to focus on drifting around corners where you can drive at high speeds and the car would automatically go into a drift sequence in order to maintain the speed going round corners of each of the tracks. With that being said, the game itself also does have a few flaws in terms of the mechanics themselves, as if you drift too far and you hit a wall or you get stuck in a corner, it will drastically slow you down, and with the aggressive computer AI, they will almost always overtake you at a moment's notice. But with a bit of finesse and a bit of practice and patience, you will be able to master the controls in the game like that of the first game, and you will have equally one of the best arcade experiences that you can have on the PlayStation 1. And if you are into drift games as well, this unique package combines both elements. So if it is something that you're into, Explosive Racing would be worth checking out. Ridge Racer is the third entry in the iconic Ridge Racer series. It saw release back in 1997 for the PlayStation 1, and this continued on with the iconic elements that made the first two games extremely popular. It took everything that was great about the original two games and just totally expanded on it, with new gameplay modes, the ability to purchase cars and even upgrade the cars, both in terms of the visual aesthetic and also the overall power outputs of the cars to make them faster. So in order to progress throughout the game, you either had to buy a faster car or upgrade your current car to be able to keep up with the power output of the cars you're racing against. But where the game truly shines is in its level design and environments, as it is heavily improved and has a more realistic take compared to that of the original two titles, both Ridge Racer and Ridge Racer Revolution. But it still captures and keeps the same characteristics and handling dynamics from the original two games in terms of the drift qualities. And this is what the Ridge Racer or Ridge Racer games are renowned for, is the handling dynamics. As when Ridge Racer 1 was first released back on the PlayStation in 1995, it was the first true arcade port ever released on the system, but it was also the first of its kind to implement drift style mechanics, and honestly it perfected the system that is yet to still be bettered even to this day, as there are many other racers out there that have attempted to achieve a similar feat, but very few have ever gotten close to the overall feel and quality of the drift elements within the Ridge Racer series. series. And the third game, Raid Racer, just continues on that trend, and even though it expands on it in so many ways, it still has all of those unique qualities that make it so iconic. And with that being said, it still holds the mantle as being one of the best drift racers on the PS1, hands down. It will take some skill and patience to get used to the drift mechanics in this game, but once you master it, you will have without a doubt one of the best experiences that you will ever have on a racing game on the PS1 or in general. Like the previous two games in the series, the drift elements in this game are just so good, and when you execute the perfect drift, it leaves you with such a massive smile on your face that you get such a sense of achievement and reward from the efforts that you're willing to put in, and that's what this game gives you in abundance. So it's definitely one of those games that you really do need to play in all regards. And if you do enjoy drift racers with drift style elements, you won't go wrong with Raid Racer. It really is that good. With so many unique and quirky style racers that were released on the PS1, there's very few that really stand out and really capture the essence of the arcade feel, along with being able to utilise very effective drift style mechanics into the gameplay. And Side by Side Special emphasises all those elements into one really good package, as the game has a good mix and balance of arcade elements, enough to keep the players engaged, with plenty of tracks and plenty of cars on offer, all with their own difficulty ranges and challenges to overcome, but with enough cars from very popular brands from Toyota to Honda to Nissan, all highly sought after cars from the JDM market. It's enough to keep people playing for quite a while, and it's also considered to be one of the better racing games on the system, because it's one of the very few games that captures all of those elements and puts them all together, as the game has you focusing around races on mountain courses, even to likes of rally style and even snow mountain type courses, that alters the gameplay and the feel of the car as you play through it, and is also one of the best games to implement the drift style mechanics. And it's very easy to put the car into a drift going around corners, and if you practice enough, you will be able to maintain the drift long enough that you can oversee your opponent so that you can go and win the race. So if you're looking for a really good mix of arcade style racing along with exceptional drift style mechanics that was only released in Japan, then Side by Side Special will be the game for you. Tokyo Highway Battle is a unique arcade-style drift racing game published by Jaleco for the PlayStation in North America and Japan in 1996, and later in 97 in Europe. The game would also be rebranded under the name of Shutoku Battle Drift King for both the PlayStation and even the Sega Saturn in Japan. And this is the first game in a series of what would later be called the Tokyo Extreme Racer series, that would have appeared on later consoles such as the PS2. The game consists of the player racing around a total of 3 different types of tracks, very similar to the likes of the Ridge Racer series, even Raid Racer, that utilises arcade elements but also implements drift style mechanics into the gameplay. And very like the third entry in the Ridge Racer series, Raid Racer, Tokyo Highway Battle also utilises an upgrade and levelling up system, as when you complete each of the sections in question with all the races, you then have to proceed to gain access to higher tier and faster cars to go through the same process again, but you have to keep winning races in order to buy enough parts and materials to make your cars faster and more durable throughout each race, so you have a better chance of winning. But how does the game feel compared to a lot of other racers on this list? The game itself has some nice graphics for its time and some unique gameplay elements, the likes of the upgrade features, but the overall sense of speed, especially at the start of the game, can seem a bit slow, but that gradually increases once you start to upgrade the cars further into the game. But just note that with this game there is a difficulty curve to it, because when you go on to the next tier of races, you'll start out with a base car, but unless you have enough money to upgrade your car, it's very hard to compete against the computer AI opponents, as more often than not they will continue to outpace you throughout the races until you've acquired either a better car or upgraded the car that you currently have to a point that it can compete at that level. And what is cool about this type of game is the fact is that it has loads of upgradable parts for the cars, anything from engine parts to exhausts to upgrading radiators, even upgrading the chassis for the car. All of the intricate parts that you need to make the cars faster, you can do that in this game. And you also have access to 12 different cars, all from different brands, anything from like Toyota, Honda, and even Mazda, with the likes of the Mazda MX-5, Toyota MR2, the E86, even the likes of the Nissan 180SX, the Nissan Silvia S13, and even the R33 Skyline GTR, among other vehicles in the game. So there is definitely a unique mix of unlockables in the game to be achieved throughout play. Overall, it's a fun title. It just will take a while to get to grips with the features and the drift mechanics, but once you master them, the drift mechanics do become a lot easier. The more time you put into it actually becomes quite fun, to a point where the drift segments, once you master them, are quite fun to get to grips with. So even with the limitation of the 3 tracks, there's still plenty of features on offer to unlock and a lot of gameplay modes that will keep you playing for quite some time. It's just another one of those unique racers that is suited to the time of the PlayStation when it was released, and it is well worth a look, especially if you want to compare it to other racers on this list. Released in 1998, Touge Max 2 is a sequel to the original Touge Max that was also given the name Peak Performance in other regions, and this sequel was a Japan exclusive for the console back at that time, so it only seen a release in that region. But as with the first game, this is also a unique arcade style racer that primarily focuses on Touge style racing, but also implements drift style mechanics into the gameplay. As you can see on the screen, when you're driving along, when you've hit a corner, you have a drift meter that increases in terms of points, so you will gain more points for each initial drift that you make without crashing or making contact with any of the environmental hazards throughout each of the courses during play. So the more points you can rack up, it will greatly help go towards your overall score towards the end of the race. Although the drift mechanics are good, they're not as well refined compared to some other games on this list. But where it lacks in the control aspect of those elements, it more than makes up for in its visual representation, as it is one of the better looking, visually impressive games on the system. So if you're looking for something that's a good mix of arcade, that it has drift elements in it, then Touge Max 2 is worth a look. Initial D was released on the PlayStation 1 back in 1999 and was exclusive to Japan only, and the game is based off the ever popular anime comic book series of the same name, where it focuses on street racing but really emphasises the whole use of drift mechanics within each of the races, as that is also the focal point in the anime series itself. So the game replicates that look and feel of the anime series to good effect, as you have a game that is quite popular and is also quite rare and has developed somewhat of a cult following in recent years, as there are a lot of fans both in Japan and outside of Japan of the series, and this game really reflects the popularity of the series itself. So the gameplay requires the use of drift mechanics where you race on mountain style environments, anything from nighttime to daytime scenes, where you're tasked to use the gameplay elements to win races and improve your overall skills as you progress through the story. There are a few different game modes on offer where you can practice your skills through practice mode while also being able to compete with other players, and then even take on the scenario mode where you progress through a story that is reflective of the comic book series itself. All in all, a very good title, even though it can be quite challenging to master, but if you stick with it, there is a very good racing game here on offer, and especially if you're into drift racing games, this is one of the best in the system, and it has developed quite a cult following over recent years. So it is definitely worth a look at. If you're a fan of the anime series and racing games in general, Initial D is one of those games you have to try out. Ridge Racer Type 4 is the final Ridge Racer game to be released for the PS1. It was released back in 1999, and this game heavily expanded across the board, everything from the ground up in terms of its visuals, its gameplay style, aesthetics, even with the features the game has to offer. But the one thing that it did keep with, even though it greatly improved on as well, was the drift mechanics, as that was one of the mainstays of the Ridge Racer series, was the drift elements, as very few games have ever managed to really perfect the whole drift style gameplay as much as the Ridge Racer series, and the fourth game, Ridge Racer Type 4, just continues on that trend, but it drastically improves on the overall visual quality of the game, as this game is right up there with games like Gran Turismo in terms of its visual quality. It is considered to be just as good visually as that iconic racer, and it is considered to be one of the most visually impressive games ever to be released, not just on the PlayStation but in general, and it looks that good that it still holds its own even today, that it also can be mistaken at times for a very early PS2 racing game. That's how good looking it is, and it captures a lot of the same elements that became popular in the third entry in the series, Ridge Racer, where you had like a real-time progression system where you raced in custom championships and you had to unlock or buy new cars and upgrade the car's features to have a chance of winning races. But it also expanded on it even further, where you could sign for racing teams, and each team had their own unique dynamics in terms of team morale and the cars that were on offer. So depending on the team that you chose could have a detrimental impact on your overall progress, whether the road to victory would have been a lot smoother or a lot more difficult due to those dynamics. But it all added to the general gameplay experience. But coupled with that and the iconic drift elements within the game, you have without a doubt one of the greatest racers ever on any console, and Ridge Racer Type 4 is considered to be the pinnacle of the Ridge Racer series even to this day, as it expanded on everything, but it just perfected it in so many ways and still is heavily regarded today. So it is highly recommended that you do check it out to see a real slice of gaming history. Released as the final entry in the series back in 2000, Touge Max G was, like its predecessor, an exclusive to the Japanese region. And like the games before it in the series, the game focuses heavily around arcade style racing but is inspired using drift style mechanics. Like a lot of other games that were released in the region during that time period, this game greatly improves over its predecessors in terms of the visual quality, but not only that, in terms of the control system in place, as the game and the overall handling physics of each of the cars in the game have been drastically refined to a point that you are presented with one of the best visual games on the system, with some of the best handling physics of any car models at that time, as the drift elements are very easy to implement, and the whole premise of the game is that you gain points the longer you can maintain a drift going around corners. The tracks are also wider and leave you a lot more opportunities to be able to maintain a lot of these drifts, and even with the accessible cars that are on offer, there's definitely a lot of playability here, and there's so much improvements over the original that you will see why this is such a good game and why it is worth looking into. So if you're looking for something that really focuses on drift style elements that is very comparable to other games on the system that also has extremely good visual style graphics, then Touge Max G is definitely worth a look. So here we have taken a look at a list of some very unique and obscure drift racing games that were released and only seen on the PlayStation 1, where they cover everything from arcade style gameplay to more quirkier style of nature of games and styles. Anything ranging from different regions from within Japan, Europe and America, but all cover one unique aspect, and that is that drift mechanics is the main core of the gameplay. With each of the games on this list, they all offer up their own unique quirks and aesthetics that appeal to a variety of gamers, both new and old, and yet they will appeal to even more modern gamers who have yet to experience these all-time classics, as some of these games went on to be cult classics that went on to span multiple versions and expand in the series over the future years beyond the PlayStation 1. And it's interesting to go back and see a lot of these games and how they fare out compared to more modern games. And in all fairness, these games still play just as well today as they've ever done. Even going back to the original Ridge Racer game, that game is so iconic and it's just as playable today as it's ever been. It's just so simple in how it portrays itself, and even to get used to the drift mechanics, although while challenging at first, once you put a bit of time into it, you will definitely have one of the best experiences that you can have for an arcade racing game. And it's really hard to believe that games were able to produce this level of quality and gameplay style back within the mid-90s, so it is quite an incredible achievement. But it also showcased the 32-bit era and more primarily the PlayStation 1 console as the go-to place for arcade gaming and just in racing terms in general, because the console offered up so many unique characteristics and various different racing games on offer, and with that you pretty much had something for everybody. That was the awesome thing about the PS1. It really did have a catalogue of very iconic games that just appeal to so many different gameplay styles and to people's interests and tastes. So it is really interesting to go back and to play these games and experience them all over again. So I would love to know your thoughts on the games in this list. Do you agree with these drift racing games that were released on the PlayStation 1? Do you think there's better games out there that are worthy of being on this list? And if so, what are your thoughts of these games in general? Did you enjoy them back in the day, or maybe not so much? Or do you still go to revisit them every so often? I'd love to hear what stories you have of these very iconic racing games, so be sure to share them down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more of these unique type of videos where I do cover a lot more of these very quirky style racing games from other different types of genres and other gameplay styles, then make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be updated when future videos are released. And in the meantime, if you would like to see more videos of other very unique and quirky style racers that were released from other regions on the PlayStation that definitely cater to various different gameplay styles and types, then check out the playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. And until next time, make sure to keep playing those classic games and enjoying them, and keep those gaming memories alive.